Good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us today. Right, are we ready to get started, Vicky? So, why do we need to talk about generations at boardroom level? Why do we need to talk about generations at all? And why do we need to talk about people at all in business? There's one thing, there's a few things, important things I've found in my journey as a business speaker and advisor. But one of the things is when I talk about doing better business better, it almost always comes down to people. People make decisions, people set strategies, and people implement the plans that we need to activate these strategies. So it's incredibly important to understand people. Now, when we have the generation discussion, it's often one about millennial bashing, right? And the conversation has kind of moved on from millennial bashing to boomer bashing as well. But the word bashing, the conversations we have about generations is very often about judgment, about who is right and who is wrong, and who's doing it better and who's doing it poorer, and how and we should be doing it, and whose ways we should adopt. The thing about generations is that it should be more about learning and less about judgment, because if it's all about people in business, and if people are the starting point from decision-making point of view, and people are the end point in terms of implementing those decisions and measuring those results and holding companies accountable, then we need to be a lot better at people. So let me just get control of the screen here and see if it wants to play with. Why should the board care about generations? It's easy to say, well, generations and people, you know, that's HR. That's an HR problem. HR should deal with it. It's not for the boardroom. HR's got it. We've set the strategy. We have the budget. HR should deal with it. But people and generations, it's not an HR challenge, and it's not an ops challenge, and it's not an executive challenge. It's a complete mindset challenge. Because if we are to overcome this challenge, and if we are to get the most from all of the generations we've got access to, then what we need to do is change our mindset so that we can change the structures of the companies we guide, and sometimes the companies we operate. We need to change these structures so that there's room for everybody. Right, so I said it's not about judgment, or less about judgment and more about learning. There's one thing I want to know before we go on with this is to test the feel in the room a little bit. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do the first poll for you. If you'd like to participate, please. There you go, clicking the right button. What are your thoughts on millennials? If you hear the word millennial, what goes through your mind? And yes, this is anonymous. It's absolutely fine. 7 votes, 9 votes, 10, 1. Oh, there you go. There it's coming through. Oh, there you go. Battle of the generations. Getting started. Come on, come on. We've got 203 participants. A few more seconds, a few more seconds. Right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm ending the poll. So let's look at what this group here looks like at the moment. Can everybody see? Share results. There you go. So majority of this group to here, and it's very important to note that it is this group here today. Not everybody and not everywhere that you go will have the same view, but the majority, 66%, says millennials are better equipped for the future than I. Then we've got 14% on you can't get ahead in life or business by doing things the way millennials do. 13%, I'm a millennial, we're great. And 6% millennials are what's wrong with the world. Right, so we've got our own view in this group of what millennials are, where they fit in, what they are equipped to do. And that is really good to have that view. But what I am going to attempt to do in this session is not challenge each of your views, each of these 4 views, but rather give you perspective on why this view is only one point in the conversation you should be having. And when you have that conversation with yourself or along a boardroom table or in your companies, it's a different conversation that you should have. Taking control of the screen. There you go. The first lesson we should learn in this learning journey and not a judgment journey is that not everyone younger than you is a millennial. And for the millennials, not everyone older than you is a boomer. If you look at popular culture at the moment, there's a lot of what they call boomer bashing. One of the attendees here attended a book launch session the other night that was hacked. A Zoom session that was hacked, and they sent me a video, and what I heard over the microphone or over the loudspeaker was these hackers going boomers, 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 boomers. So there's a lot of boomer bashing going on at the moment. Same as there's a lot of millennial bashing going around in corporate culture. It all depends on your point of view, and it all depends where you come from, how you were raised, and what shaped you. So here's the interesting thing. See if we can go to the next slide. Come on, work with me. There you go. Let's delve a little bit into what these generations look like. Okay, I'm going to minimize my poll here so I can see. So as you can see, the silent, apologies, ladies and gentlemen, my eye just decided to tear up. I promise I am not crying. So the silent generation is anyone that at the moment is 92 to 74 years old. Then the boomers, anyone born between 1946 and 1965, and so it goes along. So if you see the millennials we're talking about is Generation Y. It's born between 1980 and 1996. I myself was born in 1982, so I exhibit a lot of the behaviors of both Generation X and Generation Y. I am therefore called an old millennial. Now, before you get highly upset, these things do cross. If you read the research and if you read various opinions on this, you'll see that the years move by about 4 years to each one. So it's absolutely possible that this slide isn't perfectly accurate. You're welcome to go and do your own research to go and verify what year you are in and what year the groups you are in. But this is an aggregation of and kind of median of all of the years I could find. I would like to go through a few of the characteristics of each of these generations, because if in a bridging the generation gap, it's not about judgment, not about finding out who is wrong, but rather saying, well, this is what I can learn from this specific person, from this specific generation. Then we need to start with knowing more. I'm going to refer to research that I have here. The team, the IOD team has the links that I've used if you'd like to double check the reference or just share that with your teams afterwards. So the formative experiences is where we start. The silent generation, it's not because they are silent. It's not because they can't speak. It's because they grew up in an era that was a lot about children should be seen and not heard, and women having very, very defined gender roles. They grew up in World War II, they experienced rationing, they had fixed gender roles, and they had nuclear families. The families was everything. Families lived close together. That is their context. That's what shaped them. If we move on to the boomers, they grew up during the Cold War, they had the post-war boom, and that's where the term boomer comes from, baby boomer. There was an explosion in population growth post-war because all of the soldiers returned home. The Apollo moon landing, so going to the moon was the latest and greatest thing you could do. Woodstock, very, very family-oriented. And the rise of the teenager, the strange being that no one could figure out. Then moving on to Generation X. They lived through the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the introduction of the first PC. I can remember going to school and there were no PCs in primary school. No one had it. Luckily, my dad worked in a company where they implemented computer systems. So we always had computers, you know, from when you could have a personal computer in your home. We always had personal computers. But then as I went into high school, suddenly computers started becoming a really, really great thing. Early mobile devices, you remember those huge cell phones, those bricks that will still have a battery charge today, even if you charge it 10 years ago, those ones. And then rising levels of divorce. During that time, divorce started becoming easier and more socially acceptable. So there were a lot of kids in this generation X that started coming from broken families. and that started seeing divorce as a norm. Generation Y, the millennials, that generation, anyone from Generation X to Generation Alpha is usually grouped in the millennials, anyone a little bit younger than you. But millennials have very, very specific characteristics that are different from the Generation X's and the Generation Z. So they grew up, their formative experience was the 9/11 terror attacks, PlayStation, social media. Remember, social media didn't exist. Once upon a time, it didn't. They grew up when it started, the invasion of Iraq, reality TV, and Google Earth. So they really grew up in a lifetime where globalization wasn't all about trade deals and wasn't all about how we work in companies, but just saying, well, if I want to go to the pyramids in Egypt, I click a button. I can remember it was my first year of work, if I remember correctly, that Google Earth became popular in South Africa. And I literally visited the pyramids. And the thought that popped up into my mind was, well, why should I actually go there if I could see the exact same thing? Now, we're not going to get into the debate now if it's not the same experience, etc., because we are now only learning about generations. We are not judging them. Generation Z, they grew up, or their formative experience, economic downturn, global warming, mobile devices being everywhere and everything, the Arab Spring. They produce their own media. They are not dependent on the rise of TV and TV broadcasters to bring media. They produce their own cloud computing and WikiLeaks. Nothing is private anymore. Nothing is certain anymore. And the only thing you can trust is what is happening right now. So if we look at the difference of the formative experiences across all of these generations, then we need to keep in mind that literally the foundation that their childhoods were built on differs. So it is no wonder that the silent generation, or the boomers, see things completely differently from Generation Z. It is no wonder that Generation Z wants something completely different than the other generations. Same with Generation Y and X, etc. Because our formative experiences were so fundamentally different. If you look at the signature products across the generations, for silent, it was the automobile, the rise of the motor car. That wasn't there. For us now, motor cars are everywhere. In fact, you don't even need to own one. You can just dial one on your phone and they come running. For boomers, it was the TV. For Generation X, the personal computer. Generation Y, smartphones and tablets. And for Generation Z, it is graphene, nanotechnology, 3D printer, driverless cars, and virtual reality. If you just jump between Generation Z and the silent generation, there's a massive, massive, massive gap between a motor car is the greatest piece of technology I have ever seen, and now virtual reality is just part of my life. It is not strange. It is what I grew up with. I remember when my husband got his Samsung, I think S9 or something it was, quite a few years ago, he got a virtual reality headset with it, and my kids were still small then. And when they put it on, there was nothing strange for them, like literally nothing strange. They just put it on and started moving around and started playing, and they just got it. And they kept on asking, Daddy, can we look through your special glasses? For them, it was nothing different. Here, if we are a little bit older and we put on a virtual reality headset and we have to move in this virtual reality, we kind of struggle to deal with, well, is this real? Is this not? Generation Z doesn't question whether it's real or whether it's not. They just go, it is. If we go to aspirations, and here we are getting a little bit closer to why there's so much different in the workplace in terms of either setting strategy or implementing that strategy, because generations want different things. The silent generation, their top aspiration was home ownership. If you could own a home, you've made it in life. That was it. For the baby boomers, job security. So that's the root almost. And what you need to see all of these things for is the root of the symptoms that the major of complaints or millennial bashing or boomer bashing is about. There's a root and we complain about the symptoms. So for instance, if you are a boomer and you say, well, millennials these days or young people these days can't keep a job, they don't want to. The aspiration simply isn't to have job security, but yours as a boomer most probably was. So in your mind, you have this drive towards job security, and you cannot for the life of you understand why others won't want that. It just doesn't make sense to you. And you know what? That is fine for you. And that's where we should stop judging and just start saying, okay, I get it. I get that it's true for you. For Generation X, their aspiration was work-life balance. For Generation Y, freedom and flexibility. Now remember, the Ys are the millennials. Freedom and flexibility versus the job security that boomers wanted. And for Generation Z, security and stability. So as you can see, where millennial is a kind of a catch-all term for everyone younger, for everyone doing different. If you look at Generation Z, that is even younger, and in the workplace now, they are the young ones in our workplaces. They actually want security and stability. Why do they want security and stability? Because their formative experiences was very unstable and created a lack of security. So they aspire to move away from that lack of security into more security and stability, but still not necessarily tied to the security that older generations wanted, and that employers are necessarily creating. If we have a look at the attitude towards career, now keep in mind that what we are doing today is learning a bit more about generations, so that when we go back to our boardrooms and make decisions and set strategies and communicate these strategies and these plans, that we keep in mind what we've learned about these generations, how they act, how they work in the workplace, so that we are better equipped to make decisions and set strategies and budgets, etc., to benefit all of the generations of all of our stakeholder groups. So for silent generation, the attitudes towards career is that jobs are for life. You have a job, you keep a job. My dad, he's a baby boomer. He worked in the exact same job for 42 years. I heard it and I wanted to die. In my own career, I've had, I think, 9 jobs. I can't even remember. The job I'm holding now is my longest one ever because I own the company. So I tend to change the company up and freak my team out a lot. But that's enough change and freedom and flexibility for me within that one job. Generation X wants early portfolio careers, loyal to profession and not necessarily to the employer. I'm seeing a question in the chat that, will you get the presentation notes? Yes, absolutely. The links I've sent to the team will be distributed to you. If you want more, if you want this table that I'm reading from, there you go. Happy to share that as well. But if you just do a quick Google search on generational characteristics, it's all there to the depths of the most academic platforms that you want. Today is more of a fun overview session, but it's all available freely on Google for your own research if you're in a specific sector or want to know something specific as well. Right, Generation Y, their attitudes toward their careers, they are digital entrepreneurs. They work with organizations, not for. So they'll sign your employment contract, that's our employment contracts, but they want to work with, not for. And Generation Z are career multitaskers. They will move seamlessly between operations and pop up this and the side gig, as they call it, and they see it as work. They don't see it as being flaky. They don't see it as being not loyal. They don't see it. They are working. They are getting from work what they need from work based on what their formative experiences were. Now, the leadership style that these generations respond to is very, very important, because as directors, we are in leadership positions most of the time, whether it's direct or whether it's more indirect. So it's incredibly important to understand. Silent generation, directive. Tell me what to do and I will get it done. I won't question it. I will get it done. Remember, silent generation, children are made to be seen, not heard, that type of thing. Women are made for a specific role, not for any other role, very directive. Boomer leadership style that they prefer is consensual. If I agree with what you are saying, I will follow you to the ends of the earth. Generation X, no layers. Give it to me straight and let's move along. Very flat organization. So let's get done with this hierarchical nonsense from a Generation X point of view, and just share with me. Let's just share the leadership burden, share the leadership accountability. Millennials, leadership style now. Just now. Whatever you tell me, tell it to me now. That instant gratification bit. Generation Z wants collaborative leadership. They want you, they want us to appreciate different points of view. They want to be included. Now, say you put a silent generation leader into a room with a Gen Z person that also needs to lead. So Gen Z might be head of the youth committee, silent generation might be the board chair, and they need to come to a consensus. It's gonna get interesting, because how they were shaped during their entire lives. The one is saying, I'm telling you what to do, you should do it. And the other person is going, yeah, no, I'm asking you to ask me how we should be doing this. And if we can't recognize the roots of these generational differences, and if we don't know how to be respectful and how to learn from it, then we are not going to go anywhere. I see in the chat, please repeat what search to input for this Google search. Generational characteristics, or just characteristics of generations. You can kind of just type in generations as well, and you might get there. Don't go watch the TV show though when that is of no bearing on this presentation today. The interactive style, and here we get about we talk a little bit about if there's a broad variety of generations in your stakeholder groups, in consultative sessions, or at the AGM, or when you need to communicate, when you need to get feedback from other people. This is how you are supposed to interact with them. Silent generation, individual. Talk to me as if I'm the only person in this room. Me, focus on me, not in a group. I need your attention. The boomers want face-to-face or telephone. So this might be a little bit of a stretch because it's not face-to-face. They still want that meeting. They still want to be in the presence of a person, or they might want to pick up a telephone. And I'm going to tell you a funny story about this one just now. Generation X prefer email and text. I don't know if you've seen the memes on the internet, you know, with a bunch of gifts going when someone calls you rather than text you. I find that a lot of my peers send me a message now, can I call? They don't just call. Generation Y, online and mobile. Not face-to-face and telephone and in person, and then online and mobile. Hear this, their preference for interaction is online and mobile, which means if it's faxed to them, they're not gonna pay attention to it, most probably. And then Generation Z, constant, virtual, and real time. If you've ever wondered why people are walking with their phones like this, talking and flicking their hair and stuff, it's because it's an interactive style preference. It's because it's real time, it's true, it's authentic, it's to me, I can participate where you are at the moment. It is not filtered to the nth degree and sent to me on a distribution channel that I only log into once every 2 weeks. And we should be aware of these interactive style preferences when we decide how we are communicating strategies, decisions, etc., to influence the various stakeholder groups. What are the messages? Oh, I promised you a funny story about the face-to-face or telephone. So I have a business partner on the speaking side of my business. His name is Roger Harrop. He comes from, or he's still in the UK, and we met at a conference and we had a big chat and we realized we are the same person. We talk about the same things. Let's form a partnership. Roger is 73 at the moment, and we get along like a house on fire. But there's one problem that we had to figure out in the beginning is I would send him WhatsApps and he would not respond. He would respond on my WhatsApps via email. And I don't always want to email because email for me fulfills a certain function. If it's just a quick little chat, it's WhatsApp. So I recognized, hang on, I know there's this huge generational gap between Roger and I need to manage it. So I went, Rog, do you prefer WhatsApps? Are you okay with WhatsApps? Or do you want me to email? Because remember, we can't just pick up the phone and call. He's in the UK or wherever it is in the world. I'm South Africa. so not always going to pick up the phone. And he said, when I need to sort the conversations and search through it, I prefer it on email. It's easier to search an email. And I wanted to go, yeah, it's literally easy to search in WhatsApp because Outlook search functionality is a little bit kooky. But so then I learned that Roger prefers email for certain things and WhatsApp for other things. What Roger has done is he has increased his WhatsApp communication and his style of communication as we are starting to learn from each other, to see the other's preference and to understand where the other person is coming from. We were able to put together a project really, really fast because he had an idea of sending a massive load of information in our quarterly newsletter. And I just went, no, let's just create a microsite for it. For me, it was incredibly obvious to just go the microsite route. For him, it was mind-blowing that it could be done in that short amount of time. So what the story is supposed to illustrate is, I get things that another person doesn't, and they get things that I might not necessarily. So it is less about saying, well, which one is right? Which communication channel is right? Which leadership style is right? Which point of view is right? And rather saying, I note it. I might not agree with it, but I get that this is your preference, and let us take hands and find a way to shape our journey together. So what rewards the generation? What makes them feel all nice and fluffy inside? The silent generation loves to hear that there's a job well done. The boomers want money and a title. Generation X, they just want freedom. Freedom all the way. Now, once again, this is Generation X. This is not the millennials that everybody is saying, they just want freedom. This is Generation X. Generation Y wants meaningful work. They don't understand why they should do things just for the sake of doing things. If they don't understand and support the meaning behind things, you're not going to get the best of them. And Generation X wants privacy and choice. Choice, not to be told what to do. They want the choice. The messages that motivate: dear silent generation person, your experience is respected. So what would the silent generation do? They would gain as much as possible experience to put on their CV, because what motivates them is to hear that their experience is valued. The boomers, you are valued and needed. The Generation X, do it your way. I trust you. Now, here, you are valued and needed, and I trust you to do it your way. Already a massive gap between I am looking for someone to manage me and to tell me I'm doing a good job and that I'm on the right path. Just one generation over, it's like, leave me alone, trust me that I will get the job done. Generation Y, the millennials, want to work with bright, creative people. That is what motivates them. And Generation Z wants to know that they've made a positive difference. If you look through the line, the trend line of Generation X or Generation Z, it is all about meaning. It is all about do no harm. It is all about the greater purpose, the greater picture, going back to the roots, staying authentic, not highly aspirational in terms of money and titles and brands and so on, but saying, what does this mean and what is the impact of this on me and on my community and on the environment? In terms of work and family, the silent generation worked. That's what you did. And I remember theirs was set up with the nucleus family, so all the family was together, and there were very, very specific defined gender roles. The men worked, the women stayed home. So it was all about work. The harder you work, the better provider you are, etc., etc. That's how you were measured. Next generation, the baby boomers, said, well, this is the post-war era. We want to have a little bit of fun, but we still can't afford it. So no balance, still work, 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 work. The next three generations are all highly, highly focused on work-life balance. Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z. They want balance. So here's where it starts getting real for directors. If your board is composed of only baby boomers, only their generation, they are at a disadvantage because they might not see and they might not understand that those in the workforce, comprised of different generations, are striving for balance. So the only thing they might measure is how hard you work, how much you produced without understanding they're not going to get buy-in, because the focus for these other generations is on a lot more balance. So it's about learning on the one hand and about overcoming this immediate judgment that we make. Because what happens when we make decisions, when we set strategies, when we're in a physical boardroom and a virtual boardroom, is we are very quick to say, oh, but they shouldn't. Oh, but they should. That doesn't make sense. It is not true for me. And we should start challenging these habits and saying, hang on, have I thought about this from a different generational point of view? No, usually when I do a talk like this, or when I have a chat about generations, people go, yes, but. And it's that yes, but, as we should start maybe changing into, from my perspective, in my experience, what is right for me is, and note that, but then also say that is not the only reality here that you have to deal with. We are dealing with different realities. Right. What is happening then as well? If you look at all of the silent generation boomers, etc., there's a new generation that's rising. Oh, just quickly a note on the generation alphas. They are the age of my kids. They are too young to study. We shouldn't be doing that. So, they are the new starters, the alphas. They will get to create in a post-pandemic world. Most of them are too young to remember everything that is happening at the moment. It might be a formative experience, but they might just see it as, that's the way the world is. So the alphabet is a new start, a new beginning. We don't know anything or much about them yet. They might have traits of Generation Z, some traits of millennials, because that's who's bringing them up at the moment. But we don't know yet, Generation Alpha. But there's a catch-all term that is going to include the alphas to some extent, and including some of the younger millennials as well. That is called, come on slides, work with me. There you go. It's called Generation C, or Generation Freefall. It is everyone that is having their formative years, so from 0 to about 21 there-ish, in this pandemic period. And it's a lot to do, especially for generations, that especially for the millennials. If you look at their formative experience, it's terror attacks, it's extreme weather conditions, it's crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis, economic, social, major political changes, etc. So what's happening with Generation C, and I want to read this because it describes to me word perfect. They are adrift with leaders at the top seats of business and government that they, this generation, this grouping of generations, that they think lack the imagination and willingness to address the problems that they'll be handed long into their futures. And this is where talking about generations becomes a little tough. It's a lot of fun comparing, but from your point of view, but from my point of view. But the moment we start getting serious about generations, we should understand that the decisions we make now is going to have an impact at least 2 generations after us. And if we don't keep an eye on what younger generations are doing, then we are not in a better position or in a good position to make these decisions. And it's the same for the younger for the younger generations. If they are not able, if they're not created a space to tap into the wisdom and the lessons learned by the older generations, then they will be at a disadvantage, because they won't be able to make decisions that has a good impact for the generations that follow them. And so the story will continue and continue and continue. So if we can create a space where both younger generations and older generations come together to not say who's right, but to start saying, well, if we all work together to look ahead into the future, to make decisions that will create a future that we actually want to hand over to those that might not even be born yet, then we are going to start making different decisions. There's 3 quotes from it's one of the links that I've included for the IOD team. It's in a BuzzFeed article. They interviewed a bunch of 21-year-olds saying, well, what is your opinion on this life you're growing up in? Susanna Simmons said, I'm worried that I might just be stuck in limbo. Remember, she grew up in a time where it was the 9/11 attacks and the economic crash and the this and the parents laden with debt and no jobs, etc. So she's coming from a place saying, It doesn't matter what plans I make. I do not move. I am just treading in a bunch of peanut butter, and I'm getting nowhere. Haley Moody said, we grew up in a world where things have already gone terribly wrong and our lives are just preparing for the worst. Think about this. If you grew up in the 90s or in earlier years and there was an economic boom, things were going really well, that shaped your mindset. I remember when I grew up, I attended youth conference and so on. We were told you can be whatever you want to be. And the movies that was out, and the entire narrative, you can be whatever you want to be. As long as you put your mind to it, as long as you work hard, you'll get there. This free fall generation is growing up with the mindset of, irrespective of how brilliant you are, of the degrees you have, of the experience you gain, of the money you invest, of the amount of effort, you will most probably get nowhere, because there will be an external crisis that will come from nowhere and wipe out all of your hard work. And that is their mindset. And that will have an effect on their decisions. It will have an effect on how loyal they are to anything and anybody. It already has an effect to who they trust. So think about this. If you release financial results and you're at the AGM and you go, this is the financial results, we did so great, we are fantastic, all of our stuff worked, your younger generations in your stakeholder groupings might say, yeah, I don't trust that. Or I don't trust that for the long term because it might not last. So in terms of 5-year planning, if you have a youth committee, for instance, or a youth representative on the board or co-opted, they might not be able to hold the same long-term views that we are. We had long-term views. We had long-term plans. Theirs is a free fall. Theirs is a limbo. That's where they grow up in. And the last quote I want to read to you is, there are people out there who know what the right course of action is, and they're just not willing to listen or take some advice. And this is the mindset that is shaping this free fall generation's perspective. And the problem there is, it is once again us versus them. The older generations aren't taking care of us. And the older generations are saying, well, we took care of ourselves, you should take care. And whatever your reality is, whatever your formative experiences are, that's the viewpoint you will hold. But we should stop having conversations about who's right, who's wrong, whose fault it is, whose responsibility it is, who should be held accountable, and rather saying, I hear you, whoever you are. Older person than me, younger person than me, I hear you. I know you can't necessarily explain to me where you come from. Self-awareness is a big part of this generational gap bridging thing, but people don't necessarily know where they come from. And that's where it's not just about a generational discussion. It comes back to people being an integral part of business. And understanding people not only from a generational point of view, but also from an individual psychological point of view. How people were born, what their personalities are, where they grew up, what their experiences are. Every single individual, even within a grouping of a generation, will approach things different. And it's up to us as board members to start creating structures that everybody can operate in. Now, I want to do a quick little poll before I close the session with a few questions that hopefully will make you think. I'm not going to give advice and tell you how to do things, but I am going to ask a few questions that will hopefully light up a few light bulbs so you can start making notes so that you can know what you need to start doing. Let's do a poll quickly. Stop share results. I am finding the buttons. Right, according to the slide that you see in front of you, which generation are you part of? And I know it might be hard right now because you're trying to judge in year terms, but you heard some of the characteristics in another generation and you're confused. Just pick the closest one, it's absolutely fine. This is just, it would be interesting to see. Z, Y, X, boomers, silent generation. I'm going to give this a few seconds more because it will be really valuable for us to see what the spread is. Please vote in the poll, ladies and gentlemen, not in the chat at the moment. Right, giving you a few seconds. Here we go. So the majority of our group today here are Generation X's. Let's just look at what the age is. So in between 55 years old and 40 years old. Boomers, 30%, so in between 74 and 55 years old. then Generation Y, then Generation Z, and silent generation coming in. So I am very glad to see these results, and I'm very glad to see that there's quite a spread of this, because each one of us will approach the questions that I'm going to ask in my last slide now from a different perspective, and each one of us are going to make different notes. Just minimize that and go back. So what will you do now? What can the board do? All nice and fun to talk about the generational characteristics that you can go and Google on your own if you wanted to, or look at the links that the team will share with you afterwards. All good and fine to say you should be learning and not judging. But what are the practical things you can do right now when you leave this webinar? You can have a look at the board and committee composition. And here's a few questions for you. If any of these questions make you feel uncomfortable, make you feel angry at me, make you go, yes, but, please write that question down, because it means it struck a nerve and you might need to do some investigation about it. And that's why I'm not giving advice, but rather giving you guidance questions. Does your board and committee composition, terms of reference, etc., does it allow for less traditional and more traditional experience? Does it allow for it? Does it actively seek your recruitment processes, etc.? Does it actively seek less traditional and more traditional insights and experience? Does the induction process and the communication procedures, the meeting proceedings, does it allow for the preferences of a variety of generations across your board and committees? Does it go beyond isolated or token youth initiatives? Are we checking boxes with our generational initiatives saying, yes, we've got a youth initiative? Are we actively seeking to bridge the generational gap from the boardroom, from what we can do? Is the culture of the board and committees dismissive or nurturing to a variety of generations? And here I need to make it clear, this is not about saying boomers make space for the millennials. This is also saying startup millennial and Generation Z companies make space for the boomers, for the silent generations. There is massive, massive amounts of wisdom that we are discarding because younger generations tend to work faster, tend to not make space and time for the wisdom. Same for those with the wisdom. It will get lost if it's not packaged and distributed in a way that makes sense for younger generations. From a strategy point of view, does our strategy look at least 2 generations ahead? Is it being communicated in a way that creates meaning and makes sense for all of the stakeholder groupings in your various stakeholder groups? Does the strategy include aspirations that are important for a variety of generations? So not just financial results on the profit side, but the whole people, planet, profit, triple bottom line, because the planet and the people is more important to the Generation Z, or to the Generation Z, than profit is, and profit is more important for others. So do we have aspirations? When we set strategy, do we look far enough ahead and wide enough around us to set a strategy that makes sense for more than just us around the boardroom table? Are we communicating the results that matter across the generations? Do our policies support the implementation? So are we saying we've attended the session, we're in the boardroom, we're looking at the generations, and then we're handing that over, all of the decisions, to the executive, but the policies that we have signed off, the policies that have we approved, don't allow for the collaboration between different organizations. It still creates silos. It still doesn't get to the space where everybody is respectful of everybody else's opinions, so that we can build something together as the existing generations for future generations. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, happy to share the questions with you afterwards as well. I'll just send that to the team when we end. The second last thing the board can do something about is the budget. Are we funding projects that keep us relevant across generations? Are we allocating budget for it? And are we enabling the executive to truly engage the workforce? So if you're saying the workforce across the various generations should be engaged, but you're not enabling the executive through the budget allocation to make space for different types of communication, different types of forums, different types of engagement, it's no use having those decisions and those strategies and the intent if we are not enabling the executive, whether it be through policies or through budget. Last one is the decisions. Do you, as individual director, know who to visit or call or WhatsApp or FaceTime or Zoom or meet in a virtual reality environment when you need a view from the other side? Do you have, I've got a Roger, my wise old L, as he calls himself, not me, he calls himself. Do you have someone that you know that you can trust to give you input from their specific generational perspective? And do you consider the lessons learned or the concerns held by the various generations? Do you have a little crib sheet for yourself when you make decisions, when you set strategy, when you review decisions to go, hang on, how would they see this? How would they approach this? How would they think about this? And how should we take that into account? The final question for us all is, how good are we and how good do we intend to become to walk a mile in another generation's shoes? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to open up the poll, the last poll. I want to see what you intend to do after you've written down these notes. And then we are going to open up Q&A to see what you're saying, to see if I can help. Right, the last poll, ladies and gentlemen. What will you now do? And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end the poll quickly. I'm going to share the results, and there you go. What I'd like you to do, please, is have a look at the bottom option. I won't do anything. Now stop yourself just there. If you have just immediately judged those people for saying, well, why'd you? Maybe they're okay. Maybe they've checked all the boxes. Maybe they do have a board composition that is diverse enough to allow them to not do anything. Your big takeaway from today, do not judge, learn. Vicky, over to you for Q&A.
Thanks, Juanita. I think we've got quite a few questions that have come through the Q&A portal. Would you like to answer some of those before we open up to open mic?
Yes. Good. Let's run from the top. Billy Mawasha asked, thanks for the differences across different generations. My question, how do cultural differences influence the generational differences? So difference is influenced by generation and by culture and by individuality and by neurobiology and by psychology. So the generations is pretty much a starting point to start thinking differently. It is not a label that gives us permission to judge people and saying, you are a millennial, therefore I know this of you, so this is true for you. So absolutely, various things influence various people's decisions and their behaviors. There's an absolute influence around that. Do you think that the current, from Robin Tunison, do you think that the current COVID-19 pandemic will change the attitude of not remaining in a stable employment relationship? My opinion on this is, if you have been if you have been living in a stable environment for the majority of your life, so we're looking at the older generations now, I don't think that your fundamental thoughts, your fundamental convictions will shift that much. It is going to be challenging for those because they are going to be driven by their intrinsic motivation to strive for returning back to normal and to keep on wanting to go back to normal for them. Those that haven't been living instability for a long period of time will be able to adjust a lot quicker. So whether it will have an impact or not, I am not an anthropologist. I am hesitant to make a call. I do know the longer you're living in one reality, the harder it is for you to update that reality according to your current environment. Moving employers frequently begs the question of financial retirement planning. Younger generations, Y and Z, typically do not consider retirement, and countries will have to deal with the financial burden of sustaining older people. How do you believe this can be dealt with, particularly as people are expected to live much longer? People are also expected to work much longer, and work is going to change significantly, as it already has. So and I include myself in this because this is the way I was brought up, retirement planning. I've got my own financial planner, etc., etc. We were brought up that the way you take care of yourself is you stop working at one stage and then you've saved enough to fund your not working. Younger generations are going, but why stop working? If I can get really good at working and living and enjoying both, then why should I stop? So if I'm never going to retire, why should I have money to fund my retirement? So I'm not answering your question in the way you want me to, I know, but everything else is going to shift. So we might not have the problem of having to take care of older people that didn't prepare for their retirement, because retirement might not come. Is WhatsApp really suitable for business communications, Paul? Yes, sir, it is. My entire company is run on Google Drive, a cloud server, and WhatsApp. That's how we keep in touch. We haven't had a second's worth of downtime in this whole pandemic, because years ago, when was it, 2011, when I set up the company, I set it up for remote work. So I recruit for remote work. I recruit for all of these things. We only get into the office, or we used to get into the office a half a day a week, just because we like seeing faces. But WhatsApp is absolutely suitable for business communications. What we should get better at is reading between the lines and expressing ourselves through written text, especially the emotive part of communication via text, and finding different ways of doing it. And it takes a lot of self-awareness, and I can have another session just an hour on this, but there are quite a few other questions, so I'm going to move along. My opinion, yes, absolutely, but we should get better at baseline communication. I suppose the generation gaps.
Sorry, Jen.
Yes, Vix.
Up for some open mic, just to allow a few of our attendees to also maybe voice their questions. So if I can,
oh goodness, because there's a lot in the Q&A.
If I can ask those, if you see on the bottom of your menu, there is an option to raise your hand. If you raise your hand, I will unmute you and allow you to actually ask your question live. So if anyone would like to do that, you can raise your hands now. While
you are reviewing this, Vicky, there's one question that I would like to answer from the Q&A, please. That is from Osman Ibrahim. My son is a millennial. I'm a boomer. I am more risk averse than he is. What is the right balance? The only right in balance is how you can live harmoniously. It's not more one and more the other, but have you talked about, in this specific situation, what are the benefits and what are the opportunities of either going for this risk or reducing it? So it's not a right or wrong conversation ever. It's a how can we create a third option. Vicky, yours.
Yes. Okay, we've got a few raised hands. I'm going to allow Tshepo to talk. If you can just unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Vikeshni. And thank you, Juanita. Tshepo here.
Hey, Tshepo.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted just to ask quickly, very much around dissent or disagreement in seeing, in terms of views at board level. Do you think that the different sets that you've shared with us would react differently in terms of disagreements?
Absolutely. Their disagreements would stem from different places. Their disagreement would be motivated by different things, and they would also share their different disagreements in different ways. And then it's up to the chair to be really well versed in seeing not the symptoms of the disagreement, but asking themselves, where is this coming from? And leading the board in a discussion around what is the root cause, the root fear, the root desperation, whatever the root is, what is this, so that we can create mutual understanding, because in that mutual understanding, there might either be agreement or just understanding and respect for the disagreement.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan.
Question. Next person, Paco. You can also unmute yourself.
Paco, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, Paco. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be working, so I am going to choose someone else. Shadrach, I'm allowing you to speak.
Shadrach, you're on mute. There you go. You're off mute. Can we hear you?
No. Shadrach? No. Okay, I think maybe would you want to answer one of the other Q&A questions in the meantime?
Yes, let's have a look with the time we've got left. Hi, Juanita from Satish Rupa. Hi, Juanita. Do you find male versus female members of a certain generation are and act the same in the context we are discussing? So remember my first question about differences? That's one of the differences that comes into all of the disagreements we have. What I have found is it helps an incredible amount to kind of become a geek in differences, to know what motivates males and females, to know what motivates younger and older, to know what motivates culture and different cultures, so that when I am in a discussion with someone else, whether it be my husband, you know, who I'm supposed to know really well, or whether it be a stranger that you meet for the first time, is to, if we get to a point where we're either missing each other or there's a disagreement, I can just run through the list of potential differences once again to get to the root of what we are discussing about. And then it's my responsibility to change the style of communication or the topic of discussion, or just find a different way of approaching things, so we can get past where we are clashing to get to a point where we are saying, this is different. What it also takes is, and unfortunately for every one of you that attended this webinar, you now have the responsibility to start changing these conversations, because if you're in a position where you know more, it is your responsibility to dampen down your ego, get over what you want, and just meet the other person where they are and communicate in a way that takes them, or that brings them with you and you with them, to a third point that is mutually beneficial. Is understanding generational characteristics not a critical required knowledge for an effective board chairperson? I am not going to rewrite King 4 or add a chapter on it. It depends on each board. It depends on each company. It depends on what that specific company needs. It depends on the existing composition of that board. I would say a chairman's greatest skill would be to listen to different inputs and to be able to see people that are hiding and that aren't really good at expressing their point of view, and creating a space for them to express that point of view. So a chairperson should know a lot more than just finances, yes, but a chairperson should also know what they don't know, and they should know who to ask to contribute that part of the discussion that either they or the rest of their board members might not be aware of. Vicky, how much time do we have?
We're now at 10 o'clock, so I think we will end, unless I'm going to give one more person. Mahulani has had his hand up, so I'm going to try allow him or her to speak. So
good, and then I would like to close with an answer to a question from Nicole Shen.
Mahulani?
Hi, thank you very much. I was having connection issues, but I was quite interested to get to the point that you were discussing. You were saying that there was a generation, the only part that I heard was when you were saying that that particular generation, they will be happy to sign your employment contract, but they want to work with you. Can you please just recap that for me?
Yes, so that was Generation Y. Where's my notes? That was Generation Y. Want to work with? There you go, Generation Y. So it is the millennials, where I said they are digital entrepreneurs. They understand that they can create workspaces for themselves. They don't need employment. It's just, you know, an easier way out. So they want to work with organizations, not for organizations. They want to be taken into account in what their work looks like, what their workplace looks like, and they want to share their skills with you. They don't want to become a slave to your demands.
Would you like to answer your last question that you'd like?
Yes, yes, and then we need to move on. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to find me on all the social media platforms and on email, and happy to have discussions with you with the rest. There was, why has it become the norm for people to not write hi, hello, dear in email or social media communication? Has a lack of manners become the norm? Ladies and gentlemen, this summarizes the points of this entire session. We should not expect others to do as we do. We should not expect others to behave in the way that is suitable to us. What we should be doing is, I see that this is this person's preference. It irritates me to no extent, but it is what I am learning of this person. I'm not going to try and teach them different or teach them the way I expect it, teach them the way my parents did it, the good old days. I am just going to note that it is okay for them to just fall into the conversation and to not have the formalities that my generation is used to. That's it, we're out of time. There's a million other questions and I'd love to spend more time with you, but I know people need to move on with their days.
Thank you very much, Juanita, for this hopefully very insightful session that our audience have had. Thank you everyone for joining. As a last goodbye, if you would like to be part of some of our awareness campaigns, we would really love if everyone could send us a 30-second video clip of yourself using WhatsApp. Send your video to the number that's seen on your screen, and we would love to feature you on an awareness campaign around the Boardroom Bites at 9. If you found value in any of our sessions, you can start your video off with, I love the IODSA Boardroom Bites at 9, and I found value because, and you can share your experiences. Thank you very much. Please remember to fill in our satisfaction survey at the end or use the QR code on your screen as well. We will see you again next week.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.